Our next speaker is Dr. Ellen Bayer, who won the Distinguished Teaching Award from the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. Ellen's talk is entitled Take a Hike, Finding Nature Where You Are. Dr. Bayer's professional research and teaching interests center on environmental literature and pedagogy, and her passion is to help empower others to access and engage with the natural world. Broadly, Dr. Bayer's work approaches the arts and humanities through an eco-critical lens and examines the role of natural and built environments in the range of texts that she studies. More specifically, her scholarship explores the ways in which human desires and aesthetic preferences impact the natural world and considers the environmental consequences of our personal preferences. With the aim of reaching a broader audience, Dr. Bayer shares her work in a variety of formats, from academic and literary journals to interdisciplinary sustainability workshops to podcasts and live storytelling events. In terms of teaching, helping students connect with the natural world is at the core of her pedagogy. From writing grants to fund excursions to Mount Rainier National Park, to developing a gear lending library and spending free time out on the trails with students. Ellen Bayer helping students develop the skills and confidence to venture into the natural world as the cornerstone of her job. As her observations reveal, I'm going to read the whole thing. We're celebrating you. As her observations reveal, not only can this be a transformative experience for students personally, but having firsthand experience in the natural world also fosters new engagement with issues of sustainability and the global environmental crisis. Dr. Bayer is in the early stages of developing a new project that will collect and analyze data in order to discover if there are correlations between having a firsthand personal experience in the natural world, such as going for a hike or sea kayaking, and a deeper sense of engagement in and commitment to addressing issues of sustainability and the global environmental crisis. In other words, Dr. Bayer wants to explore whether humans tend to care more about conserving and protecting non-human nature if they make physical contact with it. Emerging research suggests that correlations do exist, and she would like to invite students to help contribute to this growing area of inquiry. Dr. Ellen Bayer.
Thank you for that nice introduction. Okay, so we're going to go on a little hike through the evolution of my pedagogy here at UW-Tacoma. My classes that I primarily teach are environmental literature classes or place-based literature classes, and I'm going to kind of show you how this has evolved in response to the students here at UW-Tacoma. So my first year here was 2014, and in an environmental literature class, a student stood up during class, during our conversation, and she kind of gestured toward the direction of Mount Rainier, which you can see from parts of campus. And she had this kind of warble in her voice. She was very emotional. And she said, "I've looked at that mountain every single day of my life, but I've never been to it. I've never had the chance to touch it." And that just floored me. I had just recently moved here, and within a couple days of moving here, I was like up on Mount Rainier touching the mountain. And I had come here from, I had taught at a private liberal arts school in rural Indiana that had a lot of resources and support for getting students outside. And so I think I really was blinded to the amount of privilege that goes into that, and also how access is not something to take for granted. And as I started to talk with my students here, I came to learn that a lot of our students here at UW-Tacoma had never even been on a hike before. And this is for a lot of reasons. Some of it relates to access, time, support, resources. Some involves people not feeling like someone who looks like them goes out on the trails. Maybe people didn't have community or know like what pass do I need or anything like that. And so after talking to students, I really started to see how widespread this was among our campus community. And so during that, that first quarter, I just realized like my mission is to get students to go touch the mountain. And that's where I started. So that was the initial mission. Let's go touch the mountain. But that was going to take some time because I didn't have vans or, I didn't have a way to get students there. There's entry fees. Our students live very busy lives. They have kind of full-time lives outside of school. And so I was trying to be aware of that as well. So I started small and started close. So here we have a couple examples of some class excursions we took in the next couple of years. On the left here, this was in my space, place, environment class. And a student had mentioned she'd lived here in Tacoma all her life, and she'd seen Vashon across the water and had never been there. So we decided, all right, we're going to Vashon. And people brought their kids, they brought their dogs, they brought their partners. Like, we just made it a big event, and we took the ferry across and explored Vashon Island. Another place, this is on the right here, this is Owen Beach at Point Defiance. A lot of our students have never been to Point Defiance Park, even though it's just right down the road. And so that became another go-to place. And the assignment I would give them there was to just saunter, just take it in and walk around. And we found clams and interesting rocks and saw harbor seals and even sea lions. And it was just kind of amazing. I would go to Point Defiance Park like multiple times a week to go run or whatever. And, it made me kind of see the park through my students' eyes and see like what a treat and an event it was for them to go there. And so it started to help me realize like, okay, we don't have to just go to the mountain. There's a lot right here for us to love and appreciate. So then the next step I took is I started to build excursions into my summer class. So on the left here, this is us hiking part of the Pacific Crest Trail up at Notches Peak up at Mount Rainier National Park. And then on the right there, this is students sea kayaking right out in the Theophos waterway. And so with the summer class, it was a smaller class. We kind of figured out carpooling. I learned that I could build in a fee for the class. The first year we went sea kayaking, I just paid for it because I didn't really know, I still need to learn a lot about how to make this stuff possible. So then I just kind of built in that course fee, and it was a relatively modest course fee, so it still made the class accessible. And with the summer class, since it's a big block of time, we had time to do these excursions during class. So that kind of took away some of the concern about students having time to actually do this. So finally, I'm trying to think now, I can't remember if this was in 2018 or 2019, but I applied for a Center for Leadership and Social Responsibility Community Engagement and Curriculum Enhancement Award and received it. And between that and getting an education entrance fee waiver from Mount Rainier National Park, and with a lot of help from Joe Lawless, who helped be one of the drivers of a van and help me get vans, we were able to finally take students to Mount Rainier National Park. And a lot of the students I don't think actually anyone in that class had been to Mount Rainier National Park before. And several had never been on a hike before. And so we have a couple students here. That day it was like whiteout conditions at times, and I was kind of fretting because I felt like, oh, they can't see the mountain and they're not gonna like this. And they're like, no, it makes it wilder. And so they were just so excited. And I'll just share one little story that stood out from this adventure. I mean, there's a lot I could share, but I had this student. He had recently moved to the Pacific Northwest. He was a refugee from Afghanistan, and he really missed his home village, which was in the Hindu Kush, which is a beautiful mountain range in Afghanistan. And he felt like he wanted to be in the mountains, but didn't know how to access them. And so when we got to Mount Rainier, at one point you could see the summit of the mountain, and he said, like, I'm going to the top. And I didn't want to tell him, like, we have 3 hours, like, you don't have the gear. I was like, just be back at the van in 3 hours and, we're good. And, it was just so amazing to see his reaction he didn't get to the top, but he got far enough to be excited and to feel like he'd had a real adventure. And he ended up talking about that in his final project. A lot of these students kind of built this excursion into their final projects. So, okay, we touched the mountain. But then COVID came, and I had to totally rethink everything because, well, we were all like building the plane as we were flying it and trying to figure out what teaching looked like when you're totally online and remote. And so during the spring of 2020 and the summer of 2020, I shifted my focus and started thinking about, well, let's find nature where we're at. For part of that, we're in this lockdown where we can't leave our homes. And even after that, we're not supposed to travel far. Once it did start to open up, we weren't still kind of supposed to shelter in place as much as possible. And so I started thinking about, well, what are ways that students can connect to the natural world just looking out a window at their house, right? Or just walking around their block and thinking about not going out far, not going out to the mountains, but like finding it, having the natural world meet you where you're at. So I'm gonna show you some pictures that students sent me over the next couple of years as I started realigning my vision toward finding the natural world like in built environments, in urban spaces. And unprompted, students just started sending me pictures of what they were finding. So all of these are student pictures. On the left here, a student made a terrarium from different mosses that he had collected on his walk. Another student decided he wanted to take pictures of birds and work on identifying them. So he found a kingfisher here. This was a park that was right by his house, which he never knew he could find, interesting birds there. The student found a bird in a park near their house eating a fish and got a picture of it. Another student did go out to Point Defiance and was really amazed by all the fungi. We had some students here who were bringing family and friends into their experiences as well. So instead of thinking of this as a solo experience, they started thinking about how did they bring their families and friends into it. And even one thing I talked with students about, there was some research that I came across that showed that even having like a fake plant on your desk or in your house can help brighten your mood, can help with depression and anxiety because of that like connection to the natural, even if it's a fake plant. So we started talking about just incorporating little things like that into our homes or spaces that don't entail having to go far, right? But bringing the natural world to us. We also started talking a lot about wildness, right? So wilderness is a location, and there's a legal definition of what constitutes a wilderness. But wildness is a state of being. And so I started to talk about this with my students a lot. We think of ourselves as living in this built environment that's completely human-made and controlled. But actually, even in Tacoma, we have lots of wildness. We have crows, they're not domesticated or trained, squirrels. We have, students started noticing like, wow, there's weeds or flowers coming through cracks that, nobody planted. Even coyotes seen in the city. And so that idea that humans and non-human nature do already coexist within built environments was kind of a revelation for them. And it started to help all of us see that we don't have to go far. And I think that was a big lesson for me as well, especially in 2020 when, I'm a person who spends a lot of my time in the wilderness, and to feel confined at first was really difficult for me and really bad for my mental health. And doing this project with my students, it helped me start to rethink my own relationship to the natural world as well, and to start to find ways to connect with the natural within my own built environment. For 2021, I was supposed to be on sabbatical, and I was supposed to spend my sabbatical on a project in Nepal, and that didn't happen, obviously. And so I had to rethink, like, what does my sabbatical wilderness project look like? And that helped me look more local. And I don't want to say I'm glad I didn't go to Nepal for my project, but I think it was actually really important for me to learn this along with my students, that I can find wildness right in my backyard. So then as we started to return to campus, I started integrating, and I had done stuff like this, but I started to make it much more a part of every single class meeting, that we start to work on engaging with the natural world right here on campus during class. So just building it into my class time. One day I will have students go out in teams and they download apps on their phones and they have to identify plants and trees on campus, and they get, a set amount of time, and then they have to come back and get me, and then they take me on a tour of the trees. They introduce me to the trees and plants on campus. It's just a way for them to kind of slow down and not just kind of walk past the backdrop of the campus, but actually be engaged with it. And then they start asking questions like, oh, well, this is a non-native species. Who decided to introduce that? Or why don't we have, more stuff here? And so they start to ask questions, and then they want to start to find out those answers to those questions. And so it starts to get them engaged on, their physical environment on campus in a new way. And then, sometimes we spread out a little bit further as well. So going over to the Theophos waterway. And I love on the left here, you can kind of see behind the bridge there, you can see, Mount Rainier kind of sticking out from the top. And so just thinking about the fact that we're in this built environment, but there's a waterway there, there's mountains in the background, we're still surrounded by it, even if it feels like we've cut ourselves off. We also have the Giving Garden on campus. So I usually find a way to take all of my classes to the Giving Garden. We taste the plants, and they get pretty excited about that. And we talk about which one was everyone's favorite, and talk about the purpose of community gardens and the roles that they've played in creating access to fresh produce in urban settings. And so there's a lot of ways that we can get out of the classroom and enhance what we're talking about in class by just walking around on campus. And then some of the stories that come through this as well. So in terms of the Theophos waterway, when you're talking about environmental literature and nature writing, the environmental crisis comes up a lot, and it gets pretty heavy and pretty depressing, and it can be hard sometimes for us to feel like, oh my gosh, how do we deal with this existential crisis? So I love taking students over to the Theophos waterway because initially it was an EPA Superfund site. I tell my students, barnacles would not even grow on the boats there. And if you know anything about barnacles, barnacles will grow anywhere. And so through a lot of effort and money, the Theophos waterway has been cleaned up. I mean, it's not a perfect waterway yet, but it's definitely improved, and people now can access it and use it as a recreational resource, and the barnacles have come back. And so, I show them this and we talk about it as a way to see a story of hope, right? Like a story of how human action and being proactive can make a difference. We also go over and visit the welcome figure in most of my classes as well, and talk about human relationships to the land and the Puyallup stewardship of the land that our campus sits on, and engage in conversations, whether we start by kind of talking about how we interpret what the welcome figure is kind of saying to us. And then we also kind of pair that with looking at different land acknowledgements and talking about how these work in tandem with each other. And so start to have lots of conversations about human engagement with the land and the water around us. So a couple things to kind of tie this all up. I wanted to rethink the books that I was teaching to better reflect this idea of finding nature where you are. And so I discovered this anthology called The Colors of Nature, Culture, Identity, and the Natural World. And it's an anthology of personal essays. It's all BIPOC or first-generation American writers, and it's approaches relationships with the natural world through a cultural lens. And by doing so, it really broadens what we talk about when we talk about nature writing. We're not talking about the kind of old canon of writers that were taught for a very long time, and students start to see their own experience in these essays, and it helps them see maybe that backyard garden is actually, they've had a really long-standing relationship with the natural world that they never really thought about, or their connection through food and their culture and how that connects them to the natural world, or relationships with non-human animals. And so it's been really transformative to have a textbook that can start to help students imagine finding nature where they're at. That then led me to develop my own book project. So also instead of my sabbatical project basically became this project. So I wrote a book proposal for an edited collection that would gather more strategies for outdoor experiential learning, especially in the arts and humanities, and particularly at urban serving institutions. And eventually I brought on one of the collaborators as my co-editor, and we produced, a book that I'm really proud of that collects so many exciting ways that people at other institutions are finding ways to address the issue of access, to think about how we can be more inclusive in engaging our students with the natural world and helping them have that outdoor experiential learning. So I'm going to leave you today with a few things that I do in my classes that I don't think you can only do in an environmentally focused class. I think these can have practical applications. And I have found that carving out class time or making things homework is a great way to just give students opportunities to connect with their environment. On the first day of class in all my classes, I send them out for 15 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, and they can't take their phone, and they don't have any job other than they have to just go out for 15 minutes. And they're like, well, how do I know it's 15 minutes? I don't have my phone. And I was like, you just have to feel it. And some people come back after like 3 minutes and I make them go back out. And then there's always the one person who comes back like a half hour later because they just really got into it. But with all of these, we always do a little reflection and a debrief. And it's the phone thing is really so interesting. Some of them are like, it was liberating. And for some of them are like, I was scared. And, we can kind of talk about those two ends of the spectrum and process that together. Sensory walks where the students go out and they experience the world. They focus on, all of their senses and again, reflect on that or identify flora and fauna. Sometimes we go outside out in the grass over here and we just take our shoes off and stand on the grass and just see what that feels like or touch the grass. I mean, it sounds like really granola, crunchy hippie, but how often do we just take time to connect to the physical earth? And so students kind of get a kick out of that. I ask them to go find wildness, whether on campus or if they do it for homework in their neighborhood. Sometimes I just say, just take a walk. You don't have to write about it. You don't have to report back. Just you go do it. And they do, I guess they have to report, they have to write, I took a walk, and then they get credit. But it's just a way to kind of incorporate that into their daily lives. There's a lot of research that shows that just a 10-minute walk a day can have immense health benefits. And what I find, if you help students start that habit, it becomes something they continue, and they let me know that's they keep doing this stuff outside of class. I mentioned going to the welcome figure or the giving garden or the Foss Waterway. These are ways to get our students out of the classroom, engaging with stuff that's, a 5-minute walk from our classrooms and helps them connect to the environment here. So I leave you with the hopes that maybe some of you will, even if just once, have students go for a walk. They really do find it refreshing because they're so overprogrammed, they're so busy, they're so connected to tech that just having an excuse to just turn their brain off and stare at squirrels can have a way more profound impact than I think maybe we imagine. Okay, thank you.